Welcome to the Insiders by Durham Lane, an industry podcast that connects the worlds of marketing and sales, one guest at a time. I'm your host, Richard Lane. I'm co-founder and chief commercial officer at Durham Lane. And today I'm thrilled to be joined by Lisa Eaton, the founder and CEO of Fabric. Lisa, massive welcome to the show. Thanks for being with us. And perhaps just to get us started, would you like to tell our audience who are Fabric and what you do?
Indeed. Thank you for having me, Richard. It's great to be here having this conversation. And yes, Fabric, we are an L&D platform that works with ambitious businesses to help upskill, train and support their marketing teams, essentially transitioning them into high performing marketeers to make sure that they're enabling growth for businesses. So we see all guys of marketers, lots I'm sure of which we're going to talk about today, the good, the bad and the ugly in there. But essentially it is our job to work to make those marketeers comfortable in their roles, confident in their roles, give them the tools and the ability and the knowledge to be able to be brilliant at what they do.
Amazing. Thanks so much for that. Probably we should add a bit of a disclaimer here at the front. So Durham Lane are a supplier to Fabric. Durham Lane are a customer to Fabric, and as our team go through the Fabric program, so we've got a tangled web, Lisa, of really good stuff actually. So hopefully, that's all positive. So thought I'd get that.
Sounds good.
So we're talking today, Lisa, about making marketing a revenue center, and someone put the cheeky words from coloring book to checkbook.
Yeah.
Now, people will object to that or agree with it probably, and there'll be a lot of passion arising from that, I think. Let's maybe set the scene on maybe that principle, and it would be great to get your thoughts around marketing as a revenue center and the sort of change that's happened over the last couple of decades, frankly.
Yeah. And I am super passionate about that particular, label that marketing all too often has, the colouring in department, the support department. It's been that way for a very long time. And I can understand how businesses have felt like that in the past, because if marketers weren't using budget to impact objectives within the business, if they weren't seeing a return from the budget that they were spending, then of course it feels like a cost center to a business. And often so it was the very first thing to cut when times get hard for businesses. But there's most definitely been a real shift in that over the last decade, if not a little bit more, that marketeers are growth enablers to a business. They are as crucial as your sales team will ever be. In fact, in my opinion, marketing and sales are one of the same department. They're not too different. And they just have different skill sets to be able to acquire, to reach, to acquire and to nurture customers. So, I understand that there has been maybe outdated perceptions of what marketing can do. I think partially it's the fact that there hasn't been adequate training for marketers to be able to really understand commercial strategy and how they must be commercial strategic marketeers in order to be able to influence. All too often marketers were just left to do stuff,
create the brochure, brochure and send out the mailer.
Yeah, completely. For so long it was, if you were creating a website and you were throwing out brochures and there was social content, if you were doing lots of stuff, you were seen as successful or busy or doing the job. It's just not good enough to be doing that stuff anymore. And in fact, if that stuff isn't proven to be working and bringing a return into the business, you shouldn't even be doing it. So the shift, I think, over the last decade particularly has been massive. It's been what's been needed for a long time in marketing. It shows the good from the bad really quickly, and I think businesses should have no tolerance for marketers who aren't willing to be strategic and commercial, because they do need to be thinking about, revenue and customer acquisition and brand awareness and all those good things. But it's definitely been a really good and positive change in my mind that the industry has seen over the last decade.
Yeah, I'd agree. And, we run a RevOps team here, so we have it all totally integrated. We're all driving to achieve the same goals with the same purpose, and you see that working, right? But we may have people listening, Lisa, that are feeling like they're still considered to be the colouring in department, and they desperately want to become the revenue generators or the growth enablers that you mentioned. So what advice would you give for a marketing leader that's sitting there frustrated at how they're viewed and wanting to change? Are there some
Yeah.
things that they could get started with?
Absolutely. And we work with teams like this all the time. So this is happening right across the board. And if you're feeling that way and tackling that problem, it most definitely you're not alone in that. But you absolutely can change that perception. It's not an overnight change. Let me start there. It takes some time. But there are a couple of things that I always recommend that you start with. Marketers have to be asking the commercial questions first and foremost. They have to understand what business success looks like. They have to understand business objectives. They have to understand the data that sits behind what success looks like to a business, and completely out of the realm of marketing. They have to understand the commercials. If you as a marketer have not been privy to that information, you have to go and ask for it. Right. And if you get pushback around being given that information, you have to be willing and ready to almost fight that argument that you cannot effectively be a revenue generator if you do not understand what commercial success or objectives the business is working towards. And I think for a long time, businesses didn't give that information to the marketing team because they were perceived as a support or a colouring in department. Yeah. But, as a senior marketeer, if you don't understand what success looks like to the business, what it's trying to achieve, there's no way you can effectively manage a budget to help support revenue growth. You're running blind. You're just throwing, things to the wind and hoping it sticks. You have to understand that to be able to make informed decisions about where to spend budget, where to spend resource, where efforts should be spent. So that's my first piece of advice. And, I always say to senior marketeers as well, don't feel like you have to understand the ins and outs of commercial, business objectives. Sometimes you don't. Yeah. Ask the question. If you don't be afraid to put your hand up and say, can you explain to me what this means or how you come about this? And I genuinely think, even if you've got a senior leadership team who haven't been used to that, the fact that you are taking an interest and standing firm on the fact that you want this information to be more effective in your role, you will eventually get them talking and get them supporting to give that information. So that's most definitely the first step. I never understand how a marketing lead can lead a team and a budget without knowing what the business objectives and success looks like. And then the second piece is build a strategy all around those objectives. Create a strategy that is working towards moving the dial on some of those objectives. Now, of course, you're only one part of the puzzle. You can't move the dial on all of those business objectives. But as a marketing team, you will certainly have huge influence over some of them, and you will be able to help move some of them. So really build your marketing communications objectives around what's going to be able to move the dial on the business objectives, and then evidence the impact all the way along, talking about how you've moved it. And that evidence piece is so important to show the business that you are in fact helping them grow, helping them achieve success, helping them achieve their objectives, and not just doing lots of lovely stuff.
Yes. Yeah. So some great start points there. That's great. And I think, really, you could argue you set up Fabric to help solve this problem, didn't you, Lisa, in terms of helping marketeers to be more strategic and to think more strategically and to be more business orientated. With that in mind, I'm hoping you've got a success story you could share of a company you've seen make that migration from being a cost burden to becoming an important piece of the revenue jigsaw.
Absolutely. And I'm going to talk a little bit about a brand that people will know, and I'm actually going to talk about it in reverse just to confuse things. Okay. What I should say is there are very few marketers that don't manage to move from a cost center and a revenue if they follow that tiny bit of advice. It's really, really simple about understanding business objectives and then building towards those. I just want to talk a little bit about Lululemon, which is a brand that most people will know, and how it's so important that you do this. And this is a brand that spent so much money and so much thought around brand awareness, putting everything into brand awareness, to be the number one leader in their field and to be a brand that people aspired buy, and a brand that people would pay way above the odds for because they wanted to be associated with this, this brand. And what Lululemon did is once they reached that number one position in the marketplace, they cut their marketing budget right back, and they reduced their marketing team right down, and they stopped the emphasis on them being a revenue generator and getting to a certain position, because they felt like they'd got there. And what unfortunately happened for them is they went backwards. They lost market share, they lost share of voice, they lost some of their customers, and they therefore lost revenue. So the team went really backwards in terms of the revenue generation that the marketing team had built. And I just wanted to highlight that because I think it's a really important lesson around anybody, any good marketer should be able to take a marketing budget and turn it into a revenue generator, be it 5 grand, 50 grand, or 5 million. A good marketer should be able to do that. What marketers need to understand is that once they've hit those objectives, they have to keep working hard to retain that position, and reducing marketing spend or reducing focus or kind of being a little bit unaware of what could happen if you don't keep fighting for that position, you can very quickly go backwards, and that can be really detrimental to revenue growth. So that just shows a little bit of the power, even with a huge giant brand, that the importance of marketing plays in the role of business like growth.
It does remind me of a quote which I love, which keeps me awake at night actually. But if you're not, particularly in times of rapid change, if you're not getting better, you're getting worse.
Yep. Yeah.
And that example you just shared there of Lululemon is that they understood the power of marketing as a revenue engine to get them to number one, which they did. And then strategically they thought, we're here now, so we can cut down on the costs and we will just coast our way and always remain number one. But when you're number one, then you have a new position to protect, don't you? And so, you could argue actually it's harder to be number one than number two, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And the impact that cutting those costs had on their revenue streams were huge. And I mean, we saw this through the recession. We saw this through COVID. Lots of businesses cut back their marketing spend because, of course, we were all very conscious and unsure about what was going to happen in the wider environment, and everybody was knuckling down and battening down the hatches on spend, and potentially rightly so. But the results that came out of the other side of COVID, particularly on those businesses who doubled down on marketing, who increased marketing spend, actually came out with the most phenomenal growth they'd ever seen, either in revenue or customer loyalty or share of voice or market segment share. So there was a real great case study that we can see over that period of time, that instead of cutting back on marketing spend in times that are troubling or times that are hard, actually doubling down on marketing can be your biggest strength if you've got a good, strong marketing team who know how to turn budget into revenue.
And that probably does come back though to that marketing team understanding the strategy and having the voice at the table to be able to present their case as to why. I guess when everyone else is cutting back and you do more, you're getting much more bang for your buck in terms of what you spend as well, aren't you? So it has a real advantage. So just on the same theme then, we've talked about the sort of strategic skill that you need. What about the skills of the individual to be more revenue focused? What are some of the top things that an individual should be looking out for above and beyond the sort of strategic play?
Yeah, so I think, commercial acumen is everything. So we've kind of covered that off, understanding that, businesses are there to make money. They have to be making a profit in order to scale and survive. Every penny that you're given, you need to turn into something that's going to influence the bottom line in some way. So being really aware of that is important. Strategically, we've touched on as well, but just being very aware of the landscape that you're operating in, the wider landscape. There are things that will influence a purchasing decision on your customers. There are things that will influence your most loyal customers to leave and go elsewhere. There are things that will just simply enhance the buying decision or would reduce buying decisions. So staying really close to your market segment and the customer is really, really important. And then being able to see those changes and then act upon those changes. So to move the strategy to allow for them is really important. One of the biggest mistakes I often see is that people set a strategy for a year, and then they put that strategic plan in a drawer, and then they just follow the plan and follow the plan, and gut instinct is telling them something's not right or something's not working or something's changed, yet they stick tight to this plan that they've made
Right.
5 months ago. So having a marketeer who is willing to look at the data, understand the data, and then make informed changes about how to improve the strategy is really important. And data and customers are everything now for me. I think, outside of commercial and strategic is one skill. Understanding and loving data and being obsessed with the customer is everything. And I think if you've got a marketer who's made up of almost those three things, commercial strategy, obsessed with data, loves the customer and can't get close enough, you've really, really got a winning team there. You can't go far wrong because everything else can be taught and learned on the job.
I've just drawn a lovely Venn diagram for that, which our listeners can't see, but I love that. So strategy, data, and love of the customer. That's great. Yeah. You find the middle point of those three orbits, and away you go. We're going to move now on to data. So you've preempted me, Lisa, but I'm spending loads of time looking at, at Durham Lane, we're spending loads of time looking at data at the moment. It's just the most important piece of the jigsaw. I think obviously you need the right people with the right skills, but if you've got the wrong data, it doesn't matter how good you are, it doesn't really translate. So maybe we could just look at some best practices in terms of, from a marketing perspective, of sort of thinking about how we segment data and in order to maximize revenue potential. Have you got thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, if you're a business that can afford it, you've got to have a good CRM. They're not cheap, and there are cheaper alternatives that you will probably grow out of pretty quickly. But an investment in a really, really good CRM is really crucial to data segmentation. It changes the game completely.
Yeah.
Understanding your ideal customer profile and then the actual human buyer at the end of that is really, really important to be able to segment data properly. If you're not able to understand the customer and exactly their buying habits and their needs and their wants and their deeper kind of behavioral traits, then it's really difficult to start segmentation because you just end up with this massive data that all looks the same and you can't differentiate it. So segmenting by firmographics, but also much more on behavioral traits we have found to be really, really powerful in creating content that really resonates with that person at the end of the line. And then I guess making sure you understand the life stages of each of those customers. So whereabouts on the funnel or the spectrum, if you like, do those customers sit? Are you taking somebody from a stranger through to an awareness stage, through to an education stage, a consideration stage, and then a purchase decision? And that funnel has been around forever and a day. But it's still every customer has a different customer journey and a different customer lifestyle, and that's why you've got to be so close to the customer to understand what that pattern looks like. But being able to segment that customer depending on whereabouts they are in that journey is very important to move them down the funnel, particularly. And being really clear on what qualifies as an inbound lead, and then what qualifies as an MQL, a marketing qualified lead, and then what qualifies as a sales qualified lead is also equally as important. Having that level of data behind the next step and the next step to get them further and further down the funnel really helps.
So the whole sort of credibility of the pipeline and we'll come in a moment. I think we'll transition to that hot topic of the connection between sales and marketing, but that's absolutely one place where you totally see it working, don't you? One question that I've always got in my mind is how do I always think of sort of in sort of like a garden, really. If you don't water your garden, it dies. If you don't weed your garden, then all sorts of things grow up all over the place. I'm not saying data's got a life of its own, but it sort of has in some ways. How do you, what advice have you got for listeners in terms of data hygiene? Sounds like a
Yeah.
school lesson, doesn't it, that? But
It is. No, and it's probably one of the most challenging elements for a marketer, particularly if you haven't got a CRM manager who is solely responsible for keeping that data clean and cleansed and correct. And it can grow into a beast of its own really quickly, this. If you're starting from scratch, my biggest advice is make sure that you understand your customer segments really well and ensure that you've got a very, very clear kind of deals pipeline for each one of those segments based on the customer life cycle. Like that is the very basics of what you can do so that when new leads are coming into the CRM, they're sitting in one of those customer segments and you can quite easily see whereabouts on the funnel that they're sitting as well.
right.
If you've got this massive data, you've just got a whole load of customers in a CRM that really haven't been segmented properly and it's just grown into this beast of its own. I'm not going to lie, it's no mean feat to try and sort that out. However, you can't effectively market to a messed up data set because you'll find, in fact, this can actually be quite detrimental. You can find you're sending new customer comms out to existing customer comms. You can do all sorts of damage there. It's really difficult to keep it neat. So you have to try and cleanse data on a regular basis.
And how what advice do you have on that? Because with some average CRO tenure 18 months,
Yeah.
so you could be sitting 2 years down the line, you had the most perfect data set and it's starting to go wrong in front of your eyes.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always a big advocate of marketing to your database to say, this is what we are, this is what we do. If you no longer want to receive comms from us, politely leave.
Right. Yeah. So sort of like a self opt out type thing.
Yeah. And lots of people see that as a backward step because they're reporting on vanity metrics. They're reporting on how many new subscribers they've got in the e-newsletter or how many they've got in the pool. If they're the wrong type of people, the best thing you can do is get them out.
Yeah.
And giving your customers the option, or your potential customers, your pipeline, the option to opt out can be really powerful, right? You don't want to be marketing or spending time on the wrong people. So cleansing in that way is always really powerful. And we do that on quite a regular basis. Right. And there's very quirky ways to do that, and there's very safe ways to do that, but giving people the option to opt out. Aside from that, it does take some manual effort. It takes a review of the customers to make sure they're sitting in the right places. It takes all sorts of data segmentation to be able to move them into closed groups. It's not a job, personally, I don't believe a generalist marketer can do on top of their marketing role. Okay. It really is once you get past a certain level of contacts, probably, I don't know, between 5,000 and 7,000 contacts in your database, it becomes a really meaty task and something that somebody really needs to own and take control of. There are provisions that you can do. There are simple steps that you can do, but it's not going to properly cleanse your data like you need it to be. So my advice would be from the start, try and get some really good hygiene practices in the data. Make sure they're going into proper segmented pots from the beginning and do regular checks of that to make sure people are in the right place, and give your customers the option to opt out if they don't want to receive comms anymore. But aside from that, I really do think once you start to get to a level where you've got a lot of contacts in there, you do need a dedicated CRM manager who can keep on top of that as a full-time job.
Yeah. Okay. That's great advice. Thank you. I've just thought of a load of work we need to do. That's brilliant. Yeah. So let's just as the final part of this episode, at least, we're going to talk about sort of that whole MQL to SQL, which really is the area where I think the worlds of sales and marketing come together, hopefully in a harmonious and one directional way. But that isn't always the case. But probably first question is, in your view, how can sales and marketing teams collaborate effectively to increase MQL to SQL conversion rates? So let's start there.
Yeah, it's really funny. I did a whole segment of a keynote on this at a marketing leaders summit last year, and I had a whole mix of sales leaders and marketing leaders in the room. And I'm a really strange mix of both skill sets. You tend to have, people will die over one or the other.
Yeah.
For me, genuinely, as I said at the start, these are one of the same team. We are all working towards the same set of objectives here. There shouldn't be a sales strategy and a marketing strategy. There should be a commercial strategy that covers both. So I believe that both the sales and marketing team should be building the strategy together with a set of shared objectives. They just influence the customer or the prospect at different stages of the funnel. And of course, they've got different skill sets, but 9 times out of 10, our objective is to acquire more customers, right? And marketing can do a huge part of that job, and then sales 9 times out of 10 are needed there to close that piece. So it makes no sense for those two departments to be working separately. What qualifies as an MQL and an SQL is a real area of contention, and I think this is where relationships suffer a little bit. Often you find sales team going, marketing's just give us a whole lot of rubbish leads and they're crap and we're not following them up, and the marketing team are going, we've worked really hard to get these inbound leads and they're great, and you're now not doing anything with them. That's for me where the relationship breakdown comes into play. If these teams are working together to define the objectives from the beginning, and sales are saying, right, this is what a really good quality lead looks like to us, and marketing are really clear on that, there should be a really seamless handover piece that happens from a marketing inbound lead down to an MQL over to an SQL. And the sales team should be genuinely excited that they've got a hot lead land on their desk that they can now go and follow up. So that collaboration between the two is super important. Feedback loops between the two teams, like, so imperative. The frustration that can build between two teams if sales are feeling that they're not getting good quality leads and marketing are feeling that they're not. This is where I see the biggest breakdown of relationships between these two teams. Simple feedback loops. This was a brilliant lead because of this. This didn't work out because of this. This one was excellent and highlighted this. It's really simple stuff. It's not complex in any way, but having a really refined feedback loop between the sales and marketing team only helps build the relationship, but also makes the lead process much slicker.
It's interesting because sorry, go on, finish your...
No, go on. Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, listening to that, I always describe Durham Lane as being the middleware that connects marketing and sales together. So in that analogy you just used, we fit perfectly in there, because marketing have spent a lot of time, effort, creativity and money, frankly, getting people to show a flicker, what I would call a flicker of interest, a hand raise. Yeah. The BDM team or the expensive sales team sitting there are not expecting to reach so low that they have to find someone who's maybe thinking about doing something different, or maybe is not satisfied with what they've got. And they want really someone that they're ready to present to and then close business with. And that's where this sort of gap comes in, I think, and has come. And we sort of neatly fit into that. We work really well with marketing. We work really well with sales. Magic 35, our qualification tool, takes it to that next level, which allows the salesperson to get excited, and that works. What's interesting for me is that we're becoming more and more owned by marketing. So that's marketing sort of deciding to take ownership of it and then deliver to sales what they believe they need, I think. So,
and I think that's really interesting and a really powerful move, to be honest, because I think sometimes where it falls down in terms of what you were explaining there is that marketing send inbound leads to sales, and they've missed a step of qualification. Yeah. So marketing get really excited by, this person's joined the newsletter, or this person's liked a post, or this person's downloaded this free tool. Amazing, send them to sales. And that doesn't show intent to buy. That only shows interest. Yeah. What we need to do as a marketing team is take those inbound leads and we need to qualify them down the funnel so that they show intent to buy, which is what is a true MQL. And you'll see your numbers drop massively. The conversion from inbound lead to MQL is always, it's much, much smaller than what you would get as an inbound lead. But what you will find, if you really qualify what an MQL is, and that is intent to buy, showing intent to buy, once that is passed to a sales person, they will jump on that, and that should be a really good quality inbound lead for them. Where it falls down is that step misses, and any type of Tom, Dick, or Harry who shows any type of interest is passed to sales, and they're just like, this is crap,
Yeah, put one call in, no one answers,
yeah.
next, so
Yeah. And so it's just a communication piece between the two departments, clarifying what the steps are from inbound lead to MQL to SQL, making sure that we're sharing constant feedback on what good looks like and what isn't good, and being big enough and brave enough to take that criticism and learn from it. And then the last thing, I guess, for me is just really, really being crystal clear on lead follow-up times and what the handover process looks like from marketing to sales. I know this is an area you guys have got absolutely nailed to the ground, Richard, but this is an area where I see loads of people just marketing pass the leads over. There's no expectations of when sales follows up. Sales sometimes don't even know what marketing did to get them over the line, and that piece should be really well defined again by both teams, so they're both in agreement. And then if that's followed, that becomes a really seamless journey of the customer kind of all the way through to acquisition. So
it's I mean, I heard a brilliant story on that the other day, and we were being touted globally by this organization for our speed to lead, because they were used to 5 weeks. You could inquire to buy something, and 5 weeks later you'd get an email back. So,
mad. And God, I mean, what would have happened? We're all guilty of this now as consumers, whether we're business consumers or personal consumers, right? We're all guilty. We don't want to really talk to somebody if we don't have to, and if we do have to, we will get our purchasing decision as far down the funnel as we can possibly go before we actually speak to a human. It's just the way that it's developed over years with access to content. So if you've seen somebody at an MQL stage, the likelihood is they are probably at a purchase and decision making stage. They've probably done so much homework. It doesn't need a huge push to get them over the line. You just have to convince them you're the right partner to spend the money with. If you leave it 5 weeks, I guarantee they will find a supplier who does the same thing as you, who does not leave it 5 weeks, and they'll have bought by the time you've reached out to them.
Speed to lead is the watchword, watch phrase, I'd say, for 25. So excellent.
I like that.
Just to, so maybe final question, Lisa, as before we wrap from this great conversation, and thanks again for being our guest. But what about marketing further down, or the other side of the funnel? So you've acquired, this is an area I'm really interested in. We've acquired a customer, and that's been a joint effort from sales and marketing RevOps.
Yeah.
We've got a customer. I'm now interested. How do we grow? How do we retain? How do we grow? How do we expand? And what are your thoughts around the support marketing can provide to assist with that part of the process? It's what we would call serve and grow in our selling at a high level methodology. It's that bit you've won the customer, and now we're off to the races. And then how do we grow it?
Completely. And I think, marketing are so instrumental in this piece that they can do even more of this piece than I think they can do the cold prospect piece. But again, this is crucial to segmentation and data. Like, you will never succeed at this if your data is in a mess and you don't know who's sitting at what point, and if they're a customer and what type of customer and why they bought. Like, you really need to have your data figured out for this. I also think this is quite a specialist marketing skill. I don't think this is a generalist marketer, and somebody who's very, very good at prospect marketing might not necessarily have the same set of skills for retention expansion marketing. So I often see the most success is in specialist roles here, not when somebody is having to do the entire job.
Right.
But without a doubt, marketing can retain that customer. If you get your customer life cycle and journey and touch points right, they can be responsible for expanding that customer. They can't spot opportunities like a salesperson would spot an opportunity, or a customer success person would spot it if they're having conversations, but they could be absolutely drip feeding content messages that will showcase a wider range of products, that will show impact if they buy the next level up or a bigger license, or another product. They can be nudging them to go from lapsed customer to a active customer again. I genuinely believe marketing can do such a huge portion of that role. I don't believe that marketing will replace customer success and essentially somebody who can look after that customer on a human level and spot that opportunity and upsell them. But I do think it has a huge part to play. And as a business, it's a much lower cost to retain that customer if you can get marketing doing a huge portion of that job and customer success doing a small portion, rather than trying to get a huge customer success team looking after everybody.
And it probably, I guess your advocacy program could be run by marketing, couldn't it? And actually, that leads you back to the beginning of the process with new customer, because you're getting recommendations and referrals. So it takes us back to the beginning.
Completely, absolutely. Again, it's being obsessed with the customer, and it's not being obsessed with them until you've acquired them. It's being obsessed with them forever. And your customers will change massively. Like, they will change, they will develop, they might start with you young and they'll mature and they'll want something different as they grow up, or their circumstance will change, or there'll be one type of buyer to another type of buyer. Like, you've got to stay close to that customer to understand how they develop in order to serve them best. And as long as you're gathering that information and you're recording that information correctly, you should be able to have a really seamless marketing team behind that are able to interject at certain points and feed the right type of content at the right time. So yeah, I definitely think marketing can play a huge revenue generator right across the board. This is why I'm so obsessed with marketing. It's so amazing, Richard.
Absolutely. Well, look, that's brilliant, Lisa. It just brings me back to that quote: if you're not getting better, you're getting worse. If you're not in touch with your customer at all times and understanding them, then you won't be responding in the right way, because everyone's changing all the time. So it's just a great reminder for us that, once a customer is won, that's just the beginning of the next stage of the journey. And then, how do we look after and do more? So, Lisa, that's been amazing. It's been a whirlwind tour of the marketing life cycle, making marketing a revenue center. We tackled this in three sort of topic areas, I guess: making marketing a revenue center and thinking about strategy, data, business success and objectives, evidencing the impact, and I guess selling your story upwards, which is a really important piece to do to make sure marketing is on the agenda. We talked about CRM and data, and I love that self opt-out option. So, I'm just going to go and email our entire database now and say, do you still fancy us? And then and we talked about segmentation, which I think is really important. And then we looked finally at that sort of the connection between sales and marketing from MQL to SQL, but also then post sale, and how do we keep our customers for longer, and some of that advocacy piece. Funnel feedback, clarity of SLA is another note I had down. So that's been brilliant. Thank you so much for being with us. I know that our listeners will have got loads from that. You've obviously joined us, and we appreciate that. Do you want to just tell people how they can find out more about Fabric?
Yeah, absolutely. Particularly if you're a business with a marketing team that you need to support and develop, and you want them to think more about revenue than just tactical delivery, you can find us at fabric-academy.com. Loads of free resources and support and help on there, but it will give you details of our subscription where we can help and support teams on a more intricate basis. You can also follow me on LinkedIn, so it's just Lisa Eaton on LinkedIn. We share and post loads of content on there from Fabric as well, so Fabric Academy on LinkedIn, and across all the other social channels you would expect. But most definitely the website of Fabric is probably the best information source. Following me or Fabric on LinkedIn, you'll get lots of good tips and advice and hopefully useful content for anybody looking to help their marketing team.
Brilliant. Thank you. Well, look, Lisa, thank you again. And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us on the Insiders podcast for another episode. I'm Richard Lane. I've been your host. If you would like to hear more from us, then please find us on your favorite podcast site, such as Spotify and all the rest. And if you'd like to know more about Durham Lane, then you can see how we are more than just SDR outsourcing at durhamlane.com. Until next time, see you then. Thanks very much.